Alright, so we're going to sketch out some of these sine graphs with a period and an amplitude shift or change. So before it was just sine of x, and maybe we threw in some numbers, but remember we've got to think about my first number as my amplitude. So my amplitude here is going to be 3, which means from my starting point, or from my center point, I'm going to go up 3 and down 3. Then my period, we always take 2 pi, and we divide it by whatever my b value is. So we're going to divide it by 2/3. When you multiply by the reciprocal, so we're going to multiply by 3/2, the 2's will cancel. Your final period is just 3 pi. So now what we're going to do with this is we take my sine graph, which is normally going to start at the origin. It's going to go up to 1, 0, -1, and back to 0, and that's going to all happen within 0 to 2 pi units. That's one period. Now we're still going to break it into 4 intervals, except instead of just putting my 2 pi here, I'm going to put 3 pi, my end, the total period. So everything has to happen in those 4 intervals. The nice thing is, every graph may look the exact same, but these numbers are going to be different. So even though they may look like they're all spread out evenly, it's very, very different based on how big these are, or small these numbers actually are. So we're going to start at 0. We're going to go all the way up to 3 because of my amplitude and down to -3. And we just have to remember that sine goes up first, back down, all the way, and then through my end point. So that's one full period. This would be 1.5 pi or 3 pi over 2. This would be 3 pi over 4 or 0.75 pi. So if we had to break them down even further, we could do that. We also could go backwards. We just have to remember to go down first. And then we've got 2 periods. So that would be a complete sine graph. If we want to do a negative period, or a negative b I should say, amplitude is 2. My period is 2 pi over 4, which is going to give me pi over 2. So I'm going to go ahead and set my graph up 2 to -2. We've got 4 intervals. We're going to end at pi over 2. So it looks the same as the top one, but you can see pi over 2, these are a whole lot smaller. This would be pi over 4, pi over 8, and so forth. The big difference is this negative right here. So some people treat it like I'm going to go backwards, which is fine. But if you do that, we're still going through the origin. We would have to remember that we're going to go up as we go backwards. So that's one way you could remember it. You could also remember it as a positive sine graph reflected over the x-axis. So we're going to go down first, whichever way you want to think of it. And if you see that's one period, you can see how it is the opposite, or flipped, of my positive. So there's 2 different ways you can remember it. Trickier, but you just have to remember a negative makes it go down first. Then, my last one, we've got a fraction for b again. Amplitude is 3, so I'm going to go ahead and do my 3 and -3. Don't get in the habit of doing this, because when we start shifting it vertically, it's going to be affected, but for right now, I'm going to set that up. 2 pi over 1/3 is going to give me 6 pi for my period, so 4 intervals. This is 6 pi. This would be 3 pi. It's a positive, so we're going to go up, down, back down, and all the way around. So there's my 1 period. I'm going to go ahead and go backwards. And there's your 2 cycles, or 2 periods, of the sine graph.